Welcome to the Whiskey Vault.
I'm Daniel.
I'm Rex. This is a whiskey from
Canada.
I think the pitch was a bit off there.
Oh,
Canada. Is this Teresa
This is
Smith?
Teresa Smith, who is officially a patron saint.
Teresa Smith. Your patron
So she's trying to send us after her foray into here's all the budget whiskeys Canada has to offer.
Yeah,
Here's some fancy Canada.
so you don't start there, Teresa. You don't start there. First you establish the deliciousness. Then you slap us with the hand.
Yeah, we call that the full weddle, the other full weddle. Let's start with this. So this is a Central City Lohan McKinnon, Central City's brewery.
I would look at the label and the name and not think Canadian.
Yeah, think Scotch.
Yeah.
It's actually a brewery that added a distillery, and they worked together to create this malt whiskey.
Incredibly light color.
3-year-old,
Yeah.
used oak,
Man,
Right.
the aromatic.
43%.
I can't decide if that's more floral or fruity.
I think there's cherry in there, but then it's really floral.
Yeah. Super.
The nose is beautiful.
Super just perfumey. It's leaping out like the color would not lead you to believe there's that much nose coming out.
I would be willing to put money on this being an Irish whiskey if it had just been handed to me blind.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's just all butter and apple and...
Because you're not getting budget Canadian maple.
Yeah. Yeah, not a hint.
All right.
So these guys are in Surrey, British Columbia, which is like an east edge of Vancouver.
Oh, Vancouver's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
We're doing a Daniel month day?
Yeah.
Then why are we on Canadian?
Because the next up in history
Yeah.
is Canada. So we're around the time when Prohibition sort of created some real problems for the U.S.
So-
and it almost wiped out the impact of Irish whiskey in the world. Scottish whiskey took a huge hit. And Canada, opposite of what everyone thinks,
Yeah.
they didn't get filthy rich by shipping us whiskey. It actually almost bankrupted the majority of the Canadian distilleries.
Why?
Because they couldn't legally get their product into the U.S., so they had to sell it illegally for pennies on the dollar to gangsters who would then turn around and mark it up like 1,000%.
So why did they have to sell it so cheaply?
There was no legal market for it.
So, but there's so much demand, though. You would think even...
They're
It's just-
gangsters, man. Do you want to be like, I'm going to negotiate with you and your Tommy gun and your 5 goons that know where I live?
Canadians can have goons, too. you know how the deals go down. You line up your goons.
Yeah,
they
we
line
know
up
how the
their
deals
goons,
go down.
Then you have send one goon out into the middle and they exchange whatever.
And then one guy in the back corner is shaking and another guy winks at him and everyone dies.
Get a drum gun.
Yeah. So I really love this one. This on the taste, it continues that impact of light fruit, apple, and butter.
Yeah.
And also
So the malty, that malty note is there, but it's overwhelmed by that beautiful floral, fruity sweetness.
this may be
It's
the
like-
most Irish, non-Irish whiskey I've ever tried.
Like candied Irish.
Ever.
Candied Irish.
Yeah.
Super just saturated with those sweet, fruity.
I
I still
actually-
can't decide if it's more fruity or floral. I think
I would keep this in my house all the time if I lived where I could easily get it, just as like a good, easy sipper for guests and for myself after the fancy stuff.
Like the dessert
Yeah.
elements in here are kind. You have to love the really desserty, friendly, sweet whiskey.
And I don't normally, but this is, maybe because it's morning, this is really going across nicely.
Yeah, it's honestly it tastes more than 43%. This is with the amount of density to those flavors. I would have guessed high 40s.
So my favorite author on Canadian whiskey history is Davin de Kergamo. And
It just sounds like you got pulled over by a cop and trying to give him a fake name.
Davin de Kergamo, what's your name? My name is Davin de Kergamo. I belong in this art gallery with all this stolen art in backseat.
Gavin.
So Canadian history, the whiskey, when people first started distilling in Canada, it was tied more to rum. Mm-hmm. Right? Because that was the product everybody wanted on the coast. That's what Washington was doing in the early revolution too, rum. But as settlers moved west, they lost access to the molasses, so they started swapping it for the grains, and they used grains of the time. So actually, for a long part of Canadian history, the dominant grain was wheat. And then it switched to rye to add kind of flavoring into it.
Right.
And then it dominantly became a rye-based whiskey.
I don't want to say it's so aggressive that it's so sweet it makes your teeth hurt, but it's so sweet it feels like it's almost spicy. It's almost hotly sweet.
Like the
Because-
way that you would call like a, like what's the hot cinnamons?
Cinnamon Hots.
Is it called cinnamon?
Red Hots.
Red Hots, thank you.
Red Hots.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost like the Red Hot sweetness. But again, I think that has, is that like a spice?
It's not cinnamon though, but it's that category
that
of
category.
sweetness,
Yeah, this is only 43%, but there's
Yeah.
a hotness from those dessert notes that if you like that kind of whiskey, it's
I feel like they really nailed
super
this one.
nice. Yeah.
So it was in the mid 1800s, over about a 10-20 year period, that the biggest four Canadian families were taking over whiskey.
Yeah.
And that was Seagram, Weiser, Walker, Worts, and Gooderham. And they established Canadian whiskey as a dominant force leading into the early 1900s, right? Now, they also became the first country to pass laws about aging.
What are their laws?
3 years, minimum 3 years.
Okay.
Period. Like Scotland and Ireland is, right?
Yeah.
America, there's no minimum. There just changes what you can call it. In Canada, there is a minimum. No matter what you're making, it has to be at least 3 years old.
So is there a Canadian, can they sell New Mate?
But it can't be called whiskey.
Can't be called whiskey.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're still the number 2 selling product, the number 1 selling product in all of North America, and the number 2 in America under bourbon, but obviously.
So the number one whiskey product
Yeah.
is, there's probably
Canada. Just Canadian whiskey of some kind.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking it's probably 1 or 2 brands that carry
Yeah.
most of that water. Like Canadian Club, is that a huge one?
Yep.
Okay, and then what's another? Oh, Crown Royal. Come on.
Yep.
Yeah, between the two, I would suspect those are taking up
All
a
right,
huge
now we're
part of
gonna
that
go-
market share.
To the opposite coast with this gift that she gave, and I'm really excited about this one. This is also Teresa. This is the Glenora distillery. Remember the one in Nova?
Good, man.
You remember the one in Nova Scotia?
All right, before we move on, this has beautiful notes.
Yeah.
It doesn't change it up and take you on a weird, funky journey. It's just from beginning to end. It's just nice, consistent, good.
Yep.
There's multiple elements, but
Not overly
sometimes,
complex.
sometimes they evolve over time, and you get like a really different finish than where you began. Nope.
Nope.
It's
This one
just
starts
the
and finishes
same
the same.
kind of niceness from beginning to end.
So remember, Glenora distillery was the one that got into a fight with the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society
Oh, yeah.
for calling themselves Glenora.
So was it
Right, Glen Breton.
Glen Breton?
Yeah.
that was the thing. I was
The distillery
remembering.
is called Glenora, but the Glen Breton is where it's Nova Scotia, right?
Oh,
Now this is their 13-year-old peated malt.
they made a Scotch.
And you know how they got it?
Yeah.
They ordered malt, and when it arrived, they realized it had accidentally been peated, and they had been sent peated malt unintentionally.
Yeah.
And so instead of figuring out how to get it back, or they just went screw it, and they distilled it all
Right.
and set it into casks to see what would happen.
Turns into Scotch.
13 years later, this is what we get to try.
Oh, we get to try a Scotch.
Yeah, but it smells. So the peat is way up front.
Yeah.
And then there's that sort of woody leather note behind it.
So let me put it this way: if this was blind and you were lined up, half a dozen Islas, and this was in the mix, would you be able to say, "Wait a minute,
That's not.
that doesn't
Not
belong
from the
here"?
nose.
Not from the nose.
From the nose, I would say, yeah, this is Lafroig. It's got that bright, shiny smoke.
I think.
Slightly briny.
Yeah, but it's a little bit more softened and rounded than just a straight up Lafroig 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it has the same kind of
That
smoke accent.
earthy, meaty.
Yeah, but I always consider Lafroig to be a bright kind of peat.
No,
whereas
I'm getting-
Ardbeg is more of a dense, dark peat.
The rounded
In
off,
my head.
the rounded off peat turns this into a little bit more of a savory meaty on the nose for me at least.
I can't get to any of the fruit, malt, or sweet notes in the nose. It's just pure smoke.
Much less aggressive than a traditional like a Lafroig Ardbeg. The peatiness is still there.
Yeah, but
but
there is a waxy note in there.
but it's balanced against some really nice sweet elements. On the nose, you're just getting peat. On the taste, you're getting peat, but it's balanced against some really nice sweetness. I think this is
Yeah, but coating. So the thing that overwhelmed me by my first sip was this weird sort of waxy feeling of oils just coating my tongue. Okay, let me get past that. And yes, it is sweet, but I can't. It's a sweetness that has no defining characteristic as one direction. It's just a general sweetness surrounded by smoke.
I think it's just a malt sweetness.
Yeah, it's just a general category of slightly sweet, surrounded by ashy.
Classic malty sweetness that does a really good job of being present enough to balance against this smoky, peaty, earthy, and a bit savory smoke. I like that, man.
Now, here's something that you want to know about Canadian whiskey that most people do not know, and I think is really cool.
Yeah.
They are one of the only countries that and by the way, when it comes to how do people do things in Canada, any way of doing it is typically done differently by somebody else. So there are some fairly common things, but then everybody else inside of that, everybody does their own weird variations.
Everybody has their own proprietary blah, blah, blah,
Blah, blah, blah. Well, this one thing is cool. Normally in America, we're all about mash bill.
Yeah.
Mix the grains, create the product.
Yeah, I see that.
They do the same thing, but they do it after aging. They mix their mash bills after aging. So they will distill one grain,
Right.
and then age it, another grain, and age it. Sometimes distilling them as either a flavoring or a base grain.
Right.
And then after they're both aged separately, they will blend them together.
Oh.
So it's an after the fact mash bill instead of before the fact mash bill.
Now, you started saying these things, and my concern was they're doing things after aging. And for whatever reason, I immediately jumped to filtering.
No.
I'm thinking, oh crap, are they filtering out flavors? No, that's not it.
No, they're
that's not
blending.
it. No, I'm saying when you first started talking, that's where my head jumped.
Yeah.
That's not the case. What they are doing, though, I think is very, very smart.
Isn't that cool?
Because
Now you
it's
know what
not
you're into.
putting stuff in a barrel and then waiting a tremendous amount of time and crossing your fingers.
Yeah.
It's, hey, we're going to put this in a barrel, we're going to wait a tremendous amount of time,
And then we're gonna
see what's in there, and then we're going to combine it with other things to give it the most interesting final product possible.
Isn't that cool?
That is interesting.
So they have two categories typically when they're distilling.
Right.
The base grain, and that will typically be distilled in a column style, higher alcohol content, run it clean,
Yeah.
run it fat, or not fat, but run it clean, run it, nonstop,
Right.
and then that goes into barrels. And then they'll distill a flavoring whiskey, which will typically be distilled more like bourbon, malt, or rye at a lower proof, sometimes in a pot still,
Right.
to keep more of the flavor compounds. Then they'll age that separately.
Okay.
So they're almost doing what you do with blended scotch, where you start with a base grain, and then you bring in flavoring malts.
Yeah.
And so the closest comparison you can probably make in your head if you understand blending is that Canadian whiskey are doing what all of the great catalog of Scottish blenders are doing. Starting with base grains,
Right.
adding in flavoring grains and creating things. So it's probably more fair to compare the classic Canadian whiskeys to
Right.
the Walkers and the Cuddies and the
Right on.
Right now, not all of them. You got people like Alberta creating rye products, and now we have a burgeoning catalog of craft Canadian distillers
Right.
doing interesting things.
So
And now they've been around long enough to have almost 20-year-old whiskeys.
the more I live with this Glenbretton, I still like it, but I start to get used to the sweeter elements, and it's beginning to just congeal into one kind of a sweet smoky note. When I first approached it, it's like, wow, there's multiple things are balanced. Now it's just like, a massive sweetened smoke.
Yeah, it's just an ashy kernel of sweetness.
But-
I wish it was a little bit hotter
Yeah.
than 40-30.
Yeah,
'Cause I think that would help.
I think people that are into Isla, and you want to take another angle of approach at an Isla whiskey, this is like a softened Isla. Could be very interesting if you can get your hands on it. If you're really into the sweet whiskeys, like the Speyside, even Irish whiskeys, then Lohan McKinnon? Mm-hmm. Yeah, then that is probably going to be right up your alley there. Both are really nice.
Yeah, I think, well done, Teresa.
Yeah.
Good choices.
Cheers to fighting, stealing, and drinking.
If you fight, may you fight for a friend.
Steal, may you steal a lover's heart.
And if you drink, may you drink with us.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us in the Whiskey Vault. Don't forget to throw in a like, hit that subscribe button on the bottom right, and drop a question or comment down below.